It was an ordinary late afternoon. The sun was low, casting a golden glow through the tinted windows of a luxury car parked in front of a simple school. He was waiting for someone, yet expecting nothing. He was there only out of obligation. And then she appeared. She walked slowly, with the light steps of someone who's never hurried, but her eyes had already seen too much. In them lived an unspoken question, and on her skin, the mark. The same mark he'd hidden since youth. Same shape, same spot, same color, as if time had tied itself in a knot and his lost childhood had come calling his name. In that instant, something inside him stopped. The world kept spinning. Cars rolled by, voices echoed around him, but within, everything went silent. It was as though his whole life had been waiting for that single second to reveal itself. What once was just past became present, and what had been forgotten began to shout, because some gesture so simple can rip through decades of denial. Some looks say what words never dared. And some encounters aren't just between people. They're between souls that never quit searching for each other. He looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. But she wasn't a ghost. She was flesh, truth, living story. She pointed to the mark with innocent certainty. "You're my dad," she said, no tremor, no hesitation. In that one sentence, the castle of success, control, and distance he'd built came crashing down. His body reacted before his mind. His body recognized before his pride did. And right then he understood, certain marks don't disappear. They only sleep, waiting for the right moment to wake. He tried to smile, couldn't. Tried to deny, didn't dare. Tried to speak, but his throat turned to stone with a 20-year knot. What do you say to a daughter you never knew existed? How do you answer destiny when it knocks where in a child's eyes? His pain wasn't new. It was ancient, hidden, stitched in silence. Yet in that moment it took shape. And shape has a name. And name has a voice. And the voice of a little girl saying, "Dad," is a truth too loud to ignore. The past had never left. It had only gone quiet. But some echoes never stop calling. Some wounds don't bleed. They burn in silence. And there are moments, rare, painful, sacred, when life gives back everything it once withheld, not to punish, but to awaken. He understood. Too late to go back, too early to run. And for the first time in a very long while, he let himself feel it all, because sometimes the reunion with what was lost begins before we even know we were looking. From that day on, he saw the world in a different light, but along with the light came a shadow, an old shadow he'd never named. What hurt most wasn't what had been said. It was everything that never was. Her absence was like a deaf echo, a presence made of silence. And that silence, which he once called peace, now showed him just how hollow it was. For years he'd lived as if he'd won. He'd built empires, collected trophies, soaked up applause. Yet every win was one more brick in a wall. He didn't realize he was building a wall against pain, against memory, against anything that might remind him he'd once been a boy who cried inside when his father left, a boy who swore he'd never repeat that abandonment. But promises made in childhood, when left untended, turn into ghosts that steer our choices. He used to say he had no kids. He'd repeat it with conviction. But it wasn't true. He just lacked courage. It wasn't an absence of fatherhood. It was an absence of answers. Deep down, he knew she might exist, and if he ever knew for sure, he'd have to change. He'd have to feel. He'd have to open doors he'd spent a lifetime padlocking shut. So he chose silence. But silence is heavy, and sooner or later, that weight collects its debt. The girl grew up without explanations. She grew up hearing half-told stories, seeing faces dodge the subject. She grew up sensing a lack no one acknowledged. That's one of the cruelest absences, when everyone pretends it's fine, yet inside you something's always missing. She drew a man she'd never met, gave him a mark on his arm, just like hers. She sensed without understanding, and she waited without knowing for what. Time passed. But time alone doesn't heal, it only postpones. And what isn't healed rots inside. He realized that when he looked at her. It wasn't just surprise, not just recognition. It was pain. It was shame. It was that old fear of not being enough, and worse, of never having been. Because absence isn't measured in distance. It's measured in silence. And his silence had stretched too long. That night, he didn't sleep. The pillow felt like stone, the bed too big. And the ceiling seemed caving on him with all the words he'd never dared to say. Sometimes what hurts isn't what was done. It's what was avoided for so long that now no one knows how to fix it. He felt it in his body. Tight chest, short breath. As if, finally, something inside admitted, I ran. Yet truth has a strange patience. It doesn't shout, but it never leaves. She couldn't explain why, yet she kept drawing that same face. A tall man, steady eyes, serious expression, always with a mark on his arm. Adults laughed it off as imagination, neediness, fantasy. But there was something more, something not invented. Because love, real love, doesn't need to be lived to exist. Sometimes it sprouts hidden, like a seed under the soil, waiting for the right season to break through. Since she was little, she dreamed of meetings that never happened. She'd wake with her heart clenched, as though grieving someone she'd never had, even without understanding. She carried a longing that came not from memories, but from someplace deeper, as if, on another layer of existence, she always knew someone had left her behind, and that someone was part of her. On the other side, he moved through impeccable routines, urgent appointments, a life that looked flawless. Yet there were moments, even amid luxury and applause, when an unexplained loneliness swept over him, a void that wasn't professional or romantic. It felt like part of his very name was missing, as if an absence were etched into his skin, one he tried to ignore but that pulse in silence. Love, when repressed, doesn't die, it just changes address. Sometimes it hides in anger, other times in pride, often in fear. But it stays, waiting. And that's what he felt when he first saw the girl. An impossible familiarity, a recognition without logic. His body knew, his soul knew, only his mind resisted. Because accepting meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling. And he'd spent his life dodging big feelings. Yet in that brief instant, between her gaze and the mark on his arm, everything linked up, like pieces of an old puzzle finally clicking into place. He realized that the love he should have given had never stopped existing. It had simply fallen asleep, stashed in a dark corner of memory, wrapped in layers of fear and denial. And she unknowingly had always called it back, in dreams, in gestures, in silence. Some connections not even time or distance can break, because they aren't made of words or presence. They're made of essence, and essence doesn't fade. It only hides until the heart decides, on its own, that it's time to remember. And in remembering, something inside him cracked. But, strangely, that crack was the beginning of something new. In a locked drawer of her mother's desk lay a stack of papers yellowed by time. Letters that were never sent. Letters she wrote when she still believed he'd come back, when she still thought love, by being love, could bring back what fate had taken. She'd write at night while the child slept, as though writing kept her sane, whispering secrets to paper because life had no room for them aloud. He never got one, never knew they existed. But if he'd read even one, he'd have felt the weight of all he'd lost. Not just a daughter, but the chance to become a more complete, more honest man. Because in those silent lines lived the truth he'd always suspected yet never wanted confirmed. A truth that had always been there, on the other side of the silence, waiting. But silence, when fed by fear, turned to armor, and armor with time becomes a prison. That's what she did without noticing. She thought she was protecting the girl. Sparing her rejection was an act of love. Yet underneath lay shame, resentment, a quiet anger of someone left behind who had a soldier on alone. So she kept the letters, hid the truth, and let the girl grow up with blanks. It was easier to manage emptiness than the hurt of an answer that might never come. Their love was real, but marked by unspoken absences. And the girl felt it, even without knowing why. Kids feel. They pick up what adults won't say, read between lines, carry on their backs the stories parents bury. She carried it all, in silence, in drawings, in questions she never dared voice. Because when love is twisted under the guise of protection, it becomes control. And control, even well-intentioned, wounds. When he found the letters, long after, It was like opening a window to the past he'd tried to bury. He read every word as if walking through rubble. Everything he could have been, everything he could have lived, was there, in the lines, in the pauses, in the unsaid. Because truth, when it misses the right time, turns chronic pain. And silence, when used to hide, never shields, only delays the inevitable. He understood. For the first time, he understood it all. There was no malice, no revenge, only fear, only human, imperfect attempts to deal with something too big to explain. And there, before those letters, he wept, not out of rage, not out of revolt, but for having taken so long to see. Because sometimes truth doesn't scream, it just waits. Patient, steady, until someone finally chooses to listen. He began to feel in his body what had lived only in his soul. First came constant fatigue, a tiredness sleep couldn't cure. Then vague aches, lapses, the sense something was wrong even when tests said otherwise. It was as if his body cried out what his voice never dared confess, as though the pain stored for years decided to ooze through skin, muscles, bones. The mind skilled at hiding, but the body doesn't lie. It carries the truths we dodge, the weights we pretend we don't feel. It soaks up every unshed tear, every swallowed rage, every stifled gesture. And so it was with him. The impeccable executive, the strong man, the respected leader was falling apart inside, not from a visible disease, but from an invisible buildup, years of silence, decades of guilt, a lifetime trying to forget what deep down he always knew. He started walking slower, missing meetings, losing focus. In the mirror, he saw a stranger, older than he really was, eyes duller than he'd admit. Because when the soul has no space to breathe, it dims, and the body feels it, responds, sometimes gets sick so truth can finally surface. On the other side, she felt it too, the daughter who now knew who he was but still didn't truly know him. She saw his fragility as a new language. He, who'd always seemed untouchable, now needed help, care, needed to be seen not as the man who built empires, but as someone who, inside, was still a boy, a scared boy, trying to mend a past he couldn't reach. She drew near, slowly, no demands, no charges, just presence. And in that shared silence, he began to get better. Maybe not physically, but inside something rearranged. Because pain, when finally heard, starts to lose its weight. It doesn't vanish, but stops crushing. He realized the illness wasn't punishment. It was invitation, a call for his own soul, saying, no more running. So he began to talk, bit by bit, not with speeches, but with small gestures, a lingering look, an apology that came with eyes instead of words, a hand on her shoulder, a silence that said, thank you. Healing sometimes starts when we quit pretending everything's okay, when the body can't bear the lie anymore and shows with quiet courage that it's time to change. She didn't quite know how to act. Part of her wanted to run, demand, ask why. Yet something in her just stayed beside him, stayed silent, stayed present. It wasn't loud love. It was caring love, one that reads the subtext, that understands sometimes loving is simply being there, even when you don't know what to say, even when the other can't meet your eyes. Seeing that strong man vulnerable shook her in ways she couldn't name. He seemed smaller, more human, more real. And in that fragility she saw, for the first time, who he truly was. Neither the idealized father nor the figure she once sketched, but the real man with flaws, fears, a late attempt to make things right. Caring for him wasn't easy. Some days he shut down completely, as if retreating into a place no one could enter. Moments came when anger surfaced, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of rejection again, fear of not deserving care. She felt it all without him saying a word. Because true love learns to hear even what's unspoken. She stayed. Even when hope seemed fragile, when recovery was slow, when pain felt bigger than their bond. Loving someone sick means accepting love. Doesn't fix everything, but it holds fast. At that moment, love was cooking meals, going to doctor appointments, tucking blankets. Simple things, yet charged with the symbolism of rebuilding. And little by little, he allowed it. He didn't surrender all at once, but yielded in small concessions, a smile, a short phrase, a grateful glance. He felt ashamed, yes, but also grateful. Because for once, someone saw him holy, even broken. No one tried to repair him, just accepted him as he was. Their love hadn't been born there, but it learned to grow there, not as a fairy tale, but as something stronger, a bond built on life's rugged ground. Cracked, yes, but rooted, because true love isn't the one that shows up finished. It's the one that decides to stay, even in what can't be fixed right away. There was a tension in the air even care couldn't dissolve. Each loving gesture from the daughter stirred an old, unresolved restlessness all around. The mother watched from afar, eyes firm, expression hard. She said little, but her silence was loaded, not a protective hush, but a threatening one, because not all anger shouts, some merely controls. She claimed she was protecting her child. He didn't deserve a second chance, she said. It was dangerous to open the door to someone who'd abandoned them. Yet behind those words lay something else, something she hardly saw herself. Jealousy born of fear, fear born of hurt, hurt born of love unreturned. No matter how well she hid it, it still stung. Not because of him, but because of the story she dreamed that never happened. Thus her care became control. Her protection turned to censorship. She tried to set the pace, the limits, the access, masking her pain with rules, her insecurity with rigidity. The daughter, unwilling to spark conflict, found herself in the center of a silent war. Every gesture of affection toward one side felt like betrayal to the other, as if loving both was forbidden, as if she had to choose. The mother's anger wasn't baseless. She carried everything alone, fed, raised, educated. Now, just as life felt manageable, he reappeared, fragile, vulnerable, yet present. And his presence unbalanced her more than his absence, because it forced her to face parts of life she preferred buried. That hurt worse than abandonment. The daughter then realized, sometimes those who shout protection loudest are the ones needing comfort most. Control doesn't always come from power, but from pain, jealousy, unnamed, becomes sabotage disguised as care. Sadly, many families turn into battlegrounds for lack of courage to talk, to name, to allow everyone their pain without invading the others. She didn't pull away from her mother, yet refused manipulation. She began to set quiet boundaries, small act of autonomy. Choices that affirmed, I see your pain, but this story's mine too. Over time, that opened space for all three presences to coexist, not perfectly, but truthfully. Because when jealousy dresses as care, it takes double love not to respond with resentment. It takes firmness to love without losing oneself. It takes courage to stay, without blaming, fleeing, or denying. Life sometimes demands we prove what the heart already knows, as if love needed paperwork. Truth required stamps. That's how he found himself before a court. A cold place of protocols where the deepest stories become case numbers. There, under strangers' eyes, he had to justify being in the life of a daughter he barely knew. Opposite him, the mother, tired, weary, shoulders hunched from battle. She wanted no war but refused another abandonment. She knew the cost of rebuilding a child after disappointment, and thus fought hard for what she deemed safe. Wanted guarantees, time, control. But beneath it all, what she most wanted was not to lose herself again. The daughter watched in silence. She grasped none of the legal jargon, but understood the atmosphere, the tension, the fear, the distance. Once again, she felt centered in a dispute she'd never asked for, as though love had to be divided, quantified, regulated. He didn't want to fight. He wanted acknowledgement, wanted to care. Yet human justice demands proof, and truth sometimes lacks voice. Only evidence. A test, a signature, a record. Even after everything was confirmed, nothing felt enough because the wound was old, and old wounds don't heal by court order. They heal with time, presence, consistency. But he stayed, not out of duty but choice. He faced cold arguments with warm gaze, didn't counter accusations but showed, day after day, that he was there, wanted to be a dad not just on paper but in practice, with mistakes and delays yet with truth. And truth, even contested, carries a silent weight. The daughter began to understand. Loving isn't choosing sides. It's having room to feel both. She didn't need to renounce anyone. She needed to accept life isn't linear. Families aren't formulas but bonds, gestures, presence. Amid confusion, something was being born. Fragile, yes, but real. That shy yet steady hope was what she carried out of the courtroom. Maybe now something could finally start. There was no grand moment, no dramatic scene, no epic gesture. Change came like morning light slipping through curtains, quiet. He began to improve, slowly, a bit more appetite, a bit less pain. Small steps, small victories. And she was there, silent witness to a rebirth announced not by fanfare but by presence. Faith returned not as religion but as trust. Trust in life, in affection, in himself. After years of fleeing, now he started walking. Still scared, still unsure, but stepping steady. He didn't talk much, but action spoke. Making her breakfast, waiting at the school gate, asking simple questions but listening hard. It was his way of saying, without words, "I'm here and I'll stay." She felt it, and it healed her in ways no explanation could, because some hurts only present love can dissolve. Present love isn't speeches. It's everyday rituals. Shared laugh odd hours, music playing low in the car, a note left on the table, a silence that no longer weighs. The mother, little by little, eased too, still cautious but less rigid. She watched from afar with softer eyes and, inside, perhaps admitted she didn't have to fight so hard anymore, could rest a bit. After all, someone was beside them now, imperfect yet trying. Sometimes that's all it takes to keep going. The house gained a new atmosphere. No euphoria, just peace. Simple peace born of small gestures that, combined, gave life meaning. He no longer talked business nonstop. She no longer avoided the past. The daughter laughed more, slept better, drew new faces in new colors. When pain yields space, laughter finds a way in. Faith there wasn't certainty. It was a daily choice. To continue, to build, to try again though afraid, though remembering, though doubting. That faith, nameless, became foundation, not of perfection, but of something real. Love, in the end, needn't be grand, only constant. And constant he was learning to be. She never said she forgave, never used that word. No ceremony, no speech, no dramatic embrace. But one day, seeing him asleep on the sofa, body weary yet face serene, something in her simply settled. A space once filled with questions was now empty, and that emptiness wasn't lack. It was relief, peace. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a favor to him. It was rest for herself. Quitting the weight of what could have been, stopping the search for blame, accepting some stories don't restart yet still move forward. Trauma ends not when we understand everything, but when pain stops defining us. He, for his part, never asked forgiveness in words, but his eyes, gestures, dedication did. Every plate he washed, every chair he pulled out, every time he waited quietly for her to finish talking, every time he listened without defense. There lay his plea, naked, simple, human. And for her, that was enough. The mother changed, too. Not easily, but with time, and time is sometimes the only antidote to certain hurts. She didn't become his friend but stopped the war, allowed herself to look without judging, even smiled faintly seeing him fumble with tasks she'd mastered solo for years. She realized her daughter's love wasn't a threat. It was new space that didn't erase what was but expanded what could be. Forgiving isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain, looking back and seeing not only what lacked but also what bloomed despite the lack. It's understanding everyone carries wounds. Everyone's trying in their own way to survive what was unsaid, unlived, impossible. And in that understanding something softens, something reconciles with its own story. The daughter now walked steadier, as though stepping with roots, no longer scared of breaking because she'd learned she could rebuild. She knew her father wasn't hero or villain. He was human, and so was she. And that was enough, because love that survives pain is the only kind that lasts. It doesn't forget. It transforms, redraws, and so, without fanfare, without a Hollywood ending, she realized something inside had been set free, and that mattered most. Life didn't go back to how it was. No one wanted it to. Back then there were holes, silences, suspended questions. Now there was something denser, a kind of love you don't see in smiling family photos, love born in exhaustion, in listening, in stubborn presence. They weren't a perfect family, but they were a shelter. And after everything, that was what truly counted. The house stayed simple. Routine stayed ordinary. Yet there was something different in how they looked at one another. He no longer had to prove anything. She no longer had to guard herself so fiercely. And the daughter, she could finally just be without carrying their pain, without choosing between loving or surviving. She was simply a kid with all the lightness and sacredness that holds. The mother now sometimes sat on the couch beside him. They'd talk about school, dinner, little things. In those small talks, they drew nearer. No rush, no grand hopes. Because family, she learned, isn't built on grand gestures but on subtle repetition. The good morning, every day even when there's hurt. The stay for coffee, even when mistrust lingers. The let me know if you'll be late, even when anger hasn't gone. He relearned to be not just a father, but a presence. He traded the shine of success for the gentle light of consistency. Discovered peace isn't found in achievements, but in bonds. In belonging. In being remembered not for epic deeds, but for simply being there day after day, despite flaws, delays, fear. And she, the daughter who once said, "You're my dad," with a strength she didn't know she had, no longer needed to repeat it. Because now he was. Not by biology alone, but by choice, by action, by shared silence, by hugs given without reason. Sometimes a happy ending isn't perfect, but it's whole. Wholeness arrives when we quit chasing the ideal and start embracing the real. When we understand home isn't a place, but a state of presence, a gesture that says, "I see you, and I'm staying." After all, love just needed a safe space to happen. And that space had always been there, waiting for everyone to be ready to return. If this story stirred something in you, if at any point you felt seen, held, or simply sat in silence with a tight heart, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a bridge inward. And sometimes all we need is a space where pain turns into strength,